You're listening to the Shared Security Podcast with Tom Eston and Scott Wright, exploring the trust you put in people, apps, and technology.
Hosted by Scott Wright, the Streetwise security coach, and Tom Eston, penetration tester and ethical hacker. We bring you stories, advice, and tips to help you make better risk decisions because nobody else can make them for you.
The Shared Security Podcast is sponsored by Silent Pocket with their patented Faraday cage product line of phone cases, wallets, and bags. You can block all wireless signals, which will make your devices instantly untrackable, unhackable, and undetectable. Visit silent-pocket.com for more details.
Hello and welcome to the Shared Security Podcast, episode number 78 for July 18th. I'm Scott Wright, the Streetwise security coach, here with Tom Eston. How are you doing, Tom?
I am doing great. How are you?
Not bad, not bad. I think people have been very responsive to your weekly Shared Security, weekly Blaze. I think that's doing really well.
Yes,
having some
it is
good increases in listenership and comments, and congratulations on that, Tom. I think that's going really well.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, it is going really well, and we've gotten great feedback about the show. People like the topics. They also enjoy it being less than 10 minutes, which is quite an accomplishment, actually.
Yeah, which we're not going to do today, by the way.
No. But there's so many news events related to security and privacy every week, so it's really hard to pick the top 3 stories.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully I've done a pretty good job of conveying the top 3 stories to everybody, and it sounds like I have. So
yeah, and I think people should appreciate that. Tom spends 3 hours every week putting that stuff together. 1 hour of it is trying to decide which 3 stories to cover.
Pretty much, yeah. And the rest is editing.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, great to talk to you again, and I think we have some good topics to cover today. So what's our agenda today?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about facial recognition that's being used in summer camps. So if you have kids, or maybe you were a kid that went to summer camps, times have changed, and we're starting to see technology like facial recognition being put in these, camps, so you could see pictures of your kids. And well, there's also privacy things that go along with that. So
yeah, absolutely. A little different than when I went to camp.
A little bit, yeah.
All right. And then following that, we're going to dig deep into the dark web.
Yeah, well, maybe not too deep, but we'll we'll talk about some things with the dark web that there was a really good article that was on securityweek.com just today about how the dark web, how some of these site operators are trying to unmask their visitors. So, criminals unmasking criminals, I guess, could be one way you could look at it.
Yeah, I think there was some good discussion there about why that happens and how they do it. So that's great. And then I'll have a little potpourri question at the end, so we'll round it out. Okay, so let's start with the discussion of kids camps and photo recognition, facial recognition.
Yes. So there is an article that was on USA Today about this company called Waldo Photos. And apparently they get their name off of the where is Waldo? You've heard that phrase,
that's
I'm
good.
sure.
That's what I was thinking it was going to be. So
it is. Yeah. Okay. I'm not sure if that's copyrighted or whatever, but the phrase "Where's Waldo?" But apparently that is their system, which they call, it's a facial recognition system that they have been selling to a large number of summer camps. Looks like about 100 camps in 33 states here in the U.S.
It's huge.
It's huge. Yes, it's really big business. And essentially they sell this technology to these camps, and then they provide the central management of, when there's photographers that are at the camps and they're taking pictures of your kids, they basically upload it to their system, and then the system analyzes the photos to determine which photos have your kid in the pictures, and they do that through facial recognition. So
What could
you
go
as a
wrong?
parent, right, exactly. So you as a parent upload a photo of your kid to their database, and then that is essentially used as the I guess technology trigger, if you will, that will go through all the photos that are taken. And I find it interesting that they take about 500 to sometimes 1,000 photos in a day that that the system has to go through. So, in terms of how they used to do this, so I know that the camp that I send my kids to, there's a Facebook page that all these photos show up online, and then you have to sift through sometimes 50 photos looking for, I think my kid's in that photo, I have no idea, and my wife and I argue, no, that's my kid, no, it's not, and so you go back and forth and that. But this technology in the camps is supposed to help parents easily identify their kids. And of course, as we've talked many times on the podcast about facial recognition and privacy, there may be some privacy risks with using a system like that.
Yeah. So I guess, should we talk a little bit about, I guess, first of all, what's the business model behind this? Like, how does does the company charge the camps, I guess, for using that? Okay. But do they charge the parents, I wonder?
It looks like they say the service costs between $1 and $2 per day of camp for families that choose to use it. So it sounds like they're making their money off of the parents signing up to use essentially the
directly,
technology.
So it doesn't have to go through the camp.
Correct.
Yeah, well, that's probably wise from a business point of view.
Exactly. It sounds like the camp just takes all their photos and then they just basically upload them to this service, which then processes them, and then they're done.
Yeah. So I guess the interesting thing here about privacy is it sort of depends on how they do it, I guess. I think the article talks about if you want your child to, you want to be able to track your child, for lack of a better word, or locate them in the pictures, you have to upload a picture of your child, right? Like you said. And so they would do something to characterize your child's face from that picture.
Yeah.
Then I guess they have to analyze every face in every picture. And the question then becomes, what do they do with the information about every face? So do they store every face and then analyze it? Or is it just some other metric that they use to decide how close a match it is?
Yeah, and that information most likely is proprietary, right? They're not going to discuss, I'm sure, the technology in great detail like that. But what they do say is it is opt-in. So, and if you want to remove all the pictures of your child, you just have to delete your account. So, they do have some controls, and then looking into the security of it, it looks like they do have two-factor authentication for the login and for the app. But again, like we've seen so many times, these new systems like this are always vulnerable to something, right? And if it was to be a target, I don't know, I'd be a little nervous just, having photos of my kids up on some,
So I could see, the greatest risk is to those who actually have uploaded their kid's picture and identified them, right? And so, presumably the system will do something to make a match and then, make some information about how many pictures or which pictures those kids are in. I guess then there's a question of, is there any risk to the other families, who didn't opt in? There's the fact that their kids' photos are there. I guess that's an acceptable risk at this point for pretty much anywhere, right?
It is. It is. And, all these places, anywhere you go that, where kids' photos are going to be taken, it doesn't have to be a camp, right? It could be some other event. There is disclaimers that parents have to sign that says you're okay with, your child may be photographed. I know schools do that here in the US of, a school event and those types of things. So parents have always kind of had that option of opting out of photographs. So this is no different from that aspect. What is different though is how the technology that's being used to process the pictures and then eventually store that data about your child in a service, and what type of privacy controls are around that, because as we've talked about on the podcast, this is kind of uncharted territory from a privacy perspective. With laws, there's not a lot of legislation about this. It's still very new. So you know what happens with new technology, right? And then there's security and privacy issues, as we've all seen. It becomes a big deal, and then people started asking questions of why isn't this regulated? Why aren't there more laws protecting information like that? And it is a hot topic right now. So we've seen everything from, I think Microsoft's president came out the other week saying that the government should regulate facial recognition technology. Facebook has been sued over their, technology that tags photos, right, using facial recognition. And there's been that big blow up about Amazon selling their technology that they use for the Amazon Go stores called Rekognition. I've mentioned this on the Weekly Blaze podcast. They sold that to the Orlando Police Department, and then it caused this huge uproar because it was really cutting edge stuff. And the police were using it, and the ACLU got involved, and now the Orlando Police say, "Oh, we don't have that system anymore." Right?
Yeah.
So
it's hard to it's hard for most people to even anticipate what the risks could be, but even experts struggle, I think, at times, right, with trying to decide where to draw the line and what's an acceptable risk or what could be a problem.
And the struggle too is that you really see some of the benefit of this technology. I mean, obviously, there's a huge benefit for parents, right? Like, I don't have to search through hundreds of pictures to find my kid. I can instantly see my kid. That's great. There's also good law enforcement use for it, right? Of, finding criminals, or, it's already been used to find terrorists and criminals and other things in investigations. So there is a very good use for it. But like anything, how do we properly regulate it? Does something like this in, case of a criminal investigation, does it need a warrant, right? Things like that. We just don't know. There's so many
gray areas. I saw some discussion a week or two ago about, pictures being taken at rallies and posted on social media. And I guess there are sort of these implicit codes or conventions now that attendees who do it regularly, they wear different colored lanyards or something saying that indicate I don't want to be photographed or I don't want to, so there's all kinds of new applications that we had never thought of before. But, just the fact that you're photographed at a rally or something, could make you a target. But I guess if you're going to a rally and you're trying to be public, then you got to have an expectation you're going to be seen and probably photographed.
Right. And I'm actually more interested too in how do you thwart or, get around facial recognition technology, right? Because there will be ways of, not just disabling those systems, but fooling those systems. I'm not talking about like wearing a disguise or a mask on your face, but, that may be one possibility. But I was reading about the Amazon technology, and even with like sunglasses or glasses, or somebody that put on like a fake mustache or a beard or something,
it doesn't work.
It could still pinpoint that person with
I'm wondering
very,
about
very good
light
accuracy.
sources, right? So if you had little reflective dots or things on your face or LEDs or something, some kind of a mask that had LEDs, would change the whole lighting of your face. That might work. I don't know. Should try it.
I'll go out and do that. It'll be interesting, but there's also the big issue of around privacy and false positives, right? Of what if you look like somebody that is a known terrorist or somebody that law enforcement is looking for in an investigation, and that happens to be your doppelganger. Because we all know technology isn't perfect. So if it does get close with a match, could you or someone be accused of doing something that just because you're in the wrong time, wrong place, right?
And we covered a bit of that in the last episode too, just on a different topic, but it always sort of comes back to that, right? If you're, you say, what do you have to worry about if you don't have anything to hide? But there's the false positives problem.
Right.
So yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very interesting topic. So, well, let's see what happens next time you send your kid to camp. And
yeah,
of course, there's the embarrassment factor for the kids too, right? I mean,
there
you
is.
start bugging them. Oh, you wore that same blue shirt 4 days in a row.
Well, I know with the camp that we send our kids to, the only way you can send them an email, but it's only one way. So they can't email you back because they are not supposed to be using technology. So what they do is they print out the emails and then they give them to your kid, right? Old school, right?
That's funny.
So you can tell them like, hey, I saw you in this picture. Stop wearing that shirt.
Yeah.
It probably smells.
Yeah. And the kid's going, damn, I can't get away from them anywhere.
I know.
Yeah. Oh, well. Yeah. And the last point I was going to make on this whole thing is it's tracking movement of any kind with anything that is personally identifiable. And that goes back to the, license plate cameras, right? So same idea.
Yeah.
That information might be stored somewhere and you're not aware of it, but it could also, maybe the reader makes an error and identifies your license in properly, right, in the database. So
yeah, that's actually kind of come back in the news too. We talked about the license plate tracking out in California, and the EFF reported recently that some of the malls out in California are actually like collaborating with ICE. So the immigration enforcement that's all going on in this country. And that's caused a huge uproar now. They're actually sending that data instantly to immigration authorities, which opens up a whole new, controversy, right? So, yeah.
We all thought there'd be too much data for anybody to be able to make anything out of it, right? But
no way.
No, not happening. Okay. All right. Well, enough with this privacy stuff. Now let's move on to another privacy thing.
Yeah, no one cares about that.
Let's move on to the dark web, where we're trying to get privacy, and once again we're getting tracked down.
Oh, the dark web, yes. So I just bring the dark web up. We'll talk about this article in a minute, but I think it's fascinating that now marketing companies and we've seen TV commercials now saying get your free dark web scan, and your data is just sitting out there in the dark web for criminals to access and all these things. So I think it's good, and we've talked about dark web and Tor and all those things on the podcast before, so I think our listeners have a good general idea of what the dark web
I don't
is.
think we've talked about it in quite a while. I was going to suggest maybe we could do a sort of a quick 1-paragraph description of what the dark web really is. I know I've been asked about it recently.
So the dark web is essentially, think of it as hidden websites and hidden services that you can't access from the regular internet, right? And when I mean regular internet is, just typing in a web, like Yahoo or Google.com into your web browser.
That's Chrome or Firefox, right?
Correct. That's the regular internet, which they call ClearNet, right? So it's, if you want to hear, there's ClearNet and there's DarkNet. Mm-hmm. So DarkNet is where you need a special browser, which is called the Tor browser or Tor protocol, to access sites. They're called onion sites. So .onion, they all have the domain of .onion is essentially a dark web site. So you can't just go to your regular web browser and type in, yahoo.onion, right? And you're on the dark web version of Yahoo. Right. Now, what's interesting is there are some services like DuckDuckGo, which is a search engine. They actually have a dark web version of DuckDuckGo that you can access through Tor on the dark web to, search through dark web sites. But essentially the bottom line is it's a completely different protocol, different network. Tor essentially anonymizes your connection. So it bounces you through what are called relays. and then out an exit node after it bounces your connection around, encrypts it. And those nodes are located all over the world. So you as a Tor user, unless you are more of an advanced user, you can't necessarily select the nodes or the bridges or the connections that you want to use. That is all kind of automated in the background through the Tor project, which runs the Tor network. And they provide the software, they provide the ways that people can contribute to the project. So you can be a node, you can be an exit node, you can anybody can kind of sign up and build a system that will contribute to the network. So that's kind of the short, down and dirty summary of what the dark web is.
So let's talk about what kind of stuff is on the dark web, because that sort of gets to this whole point of why we are concerned about getting unmasked.
So the dark web is mainly known for criminal activity. So if you remember, there was a site called Silk Road several years ago that made mainstream media attention for selling drugs on the dark web. That is a typical site that you might find on the dark web. So you might find, drugs. You might be able to buy sex. You might be able to buy weapons, all kinds of illegal things. And of course, you can buy data. You can buy stolen data, database dumps. Often, criminal hackers are going to use the dark web to sell, compromised systems and accounts and credit cards and those types of things. And what's also interesting about the dark web is there's also, very good uses for it. So, for example, it's often used by human rights activists and journalists and people in the military for secure communication, for connecting, because you can actually use Tor to connect to ClearNet sites. So you can actually go to Google and you can use Tor to do that. So it's not necessarily always about accessing .onion sites, but you can use it for, if you want to stay anonymous and you want to protect kind of the information that you're either sending or transmitting.
The reason you might do that is because it's very, very hard to trace where that session comes from, right? When you get to the final, site.
So you can kind of think of the dark web as a big melting pot of individuals, not just criminals, but there's also law enforcement and good guys and bad guys and everybody in between that are using this anonymous system to access certain things.
It's like that city in Star Wars, right, with the cantina. Can't remember what they called it, but what was it? Obi-Wan called it.
Mos Eisley. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a more ruthless batch of scum you'll never find.
That's right.
But no, as you said, there are a lot of reasons. All the human rights and privacy and advocacy. A lot of good uses for it. Which is, I guess, if there was only bad, there probably wouldn't be a lot of people supporting the Tor services. But
that's right.
So there are some upsides to it.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about the people who do run services there. They actually, from what I understand, they try and run them as pretty well-run businesses because they want to have good customer service and they don't want to get in trouble from their or they don't want to get their users in trouble. Really, they're legitimate users.
Yes, that's right. And one of the underlying currencies on the dark web is Bitcoin, because there is this, let's just say, false assumption that Bitcoin transactions are anonymous, which isn't true. They can actually be tracked because every Bitcoin transaction is put on the blockchain, which we've mentioned the blockchain in the past, but it's essentially a public ledger that anybody can see and anybody can view. And these Bitcoin transactions, with enough time and effort, someone like maybe a nation state or law enforcement would have time like that. They can actually track things to Bitcoin exchanges and eventually can maybe lead to, real names or real IP addresses being exposed. So now there are more anonymous forms of Bitcoin like Monero, and there's a couple others. Won't go into detail on that. That's a whole other level, but
maybe another episode.
Yeah, but basic Bitcoin transactions, those inherently are not anonymous. But what's interesting on the dark web is that is like the number one way of making a transaction. So if you want to buy whatever, drugs, for example, you would most likely be paying in Bitcoin for those drugs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so now that the sites are, assume you've got a site that's up and running and it's doing good business, what bad could happen from people being anonymous there?
Well, what I'm seeing more of now and more reports on is that the people running these sites on the dark web are looking for ways that they can unmask and see who are the people that are coming to their sites, who are the people that are registering and purchasing things, because obviously there's law enforcement that's out there that are, signing up for these services and trying to do their investigation to catch these criminals. So there are a lot more things going on now where you could potentially, your real identity could be unmasked, even if you are using Tor and you're taking certain precautions. So one of the things I wanted to just bring up on the podcast was, if you're going to use the dark web, make sure you know what you're doing and why you're doing it.
That's why I have never used it, because I have no idea.
Is kind of my my message to you, because the regular rules apply just like on the regular internet. You can be infected with malware and spam and all kinds of things that can compromise your system. But I caution the dark web a little bit more, because it is much different than the regular internet, where we already have some basic precautions that we just inherently take. And with the dark web, you may be getting yourself into things that you have not experienced before, and they could leave you vulnerable. So it's just something to keep in mind. Yeah, exactly. One great example is there's, a lot more of what are called beacons that are out there, where, certain cookies are being placed in your browser, seeing if you actually are coming back to a certain site. I mean, we have that now on the regular web, but, there's kind of a heightened awareness of these kind of cookies being out there, as well as, any documents that you might open or forums you might visit, and you're looking through a certain thread. There may be some type of tracking pixel, right? Like that, what Facebook uses, right? Those famous Facebook pickles.
Pickles.
Pickles. Facebook pickles would be awesome. I don't know if I'd purchase those. Facebook pixels. And these are all things that could track and eventually unmask you and find out who you are. So,
and I guess so for a use case, for example, if a law enforcement officer was trying to do some investigation on a particular forum, say in the dark web, and they would go in and they would try to register as a user, what kind of information would they have to provide? Probably similar as to any other forum, right?
Yep.
Their email address and other information.
Correct.
But if they're trying to do this sort of undercover, they're going to have made up new email addresses that don't resemble any that they've used before that people might recognize. But there still might be ways that the site would want to just double check, right? So if they like you said, they might have files that particular visitor might download, and when they download the file and open it, on their regular desktop connected to the regular internet, all of a sudden something within the file may try to reach out over the internet and get an image or something like that, right? And that would reveal the IP address of where the document was opened. And if the site had been set, and the document had been set up properly, then that's what could probably allow the operator of the site to realize, that document was given to this user on my site, and it showed up coming from this IP address on the regular web. So all of a sudden you have a connection between the IP address on the real world and the user in their site. So that's kind of the way it works, right?
Exactly. And that's where it gets into isolating your desktop, right? So if you're going to use the dark web for, an investigation or for some other purpose, even, being anonymous and you have a valid reason for doing that, you want to use either a virtual machine, separate computer, different operating system. I would not use Windows.
Different browser, different
as
plugins.
an example. Right. But I would not use your regular computer that you're using, even with, the package, they call it the Tor browser, which is essentially a separate web browser built on Firefox that is kind of isolated into its own, own browser. So all your browsing activities are kind of segmented. But again, saving documents, you're still susceptible to malware being installed through the browser, which we all know gets on your system. Ransomware is a great example of that.
Yeah.
So, the advice is typically using a virtual machine, typically a Linux virtual machine, which has a little bit better security, not as much of a target as Windows or Mac. There are we'll have some links in the show notes about some really nice virtual machine environments built for the dark web and built for Tor. One of those is called Hunix, which is a client server type of virtual setup, if you will, which is really nice. And there's another one called Tails, which is also a virtual machine, or it's a bootable system that you can boot off of like a USB drive that will provide a separate operating system for you to, kind of do your activities on the dark web. And then, you could turn it off and then go back to.
Is there anything persistent in those? Like, so if you visit the site more than once, would they recognize that you've come back if you were using something like Tails?
So Tails will allow it's amnesic, which means that it will forget everything that you did on the system as soon as you stop using it. So every reboot of it essentially doesn't store anything in memory. It's all, brand new operating system every time you use it. So
anything that was stored is likely to be gone, so it wouldn't be retrievable again. But there is also the possibility that, your configuration could be unique, right?
That's right.
It could be recognized.
That's correct. So that gets into things like browser fingerprinting and all those fun things. So, like everything, there's a risk to everything that you do, but like we mentioned with the dark web, it kind of takes that risk level and your personal risk assessment, as we talked about. I'd say up a level.
You have to be really paranoid.
You got to be more paranoid, but you just need to be more cautious. And I would not just jump into it if you don't take the right precautions.
Yeah. First time you go into Tor or the dark web, might be a good idea to have somebody who knows what's going on help you, because I guess you probably could stumble into things that would be unpleasant.
Yep. And we'll have a link in the show notes to a couple really good guides. The EFF is a great resource that has really good walkthroughs and how to access Tor the right way and those types of things that we'll reference for our listeners.
Cool. All right. So does that take care of our discussion on the dark web then?
I think that's it for the dark web.
Cool. All right. Now I'm going to throw one at you that I just thought of that. I don't know if anybody else has this problem, but just wanted to ask the expert, So we advocate using a VPN or virtual private network whenever you're in a public area, for example, if you're using Wi-Fi. It will mask you or protect your session information. So I typically do that. I have my own VPN that commercial one that I use. What I've found is it often works well, but there are some places, I think McDonald's might have been one, and I'm not sure if this is universal across all McDonald's, but certainly one I was in. It was hard to figure out at first, but it was blocking some protocols. So I was trying to do an FTP transfer, for example, and I thought my VPN was working, but it actually wasn't. So any comments on that, Tom?
So there are certain Wi-Fi and corporations that block the use of a VPN. So, and certain protocols. So depending on your VPN provider, some VPNs have developed ways around certain blocks and filters that are better than others, but Yeah, that's basically what you encountered was certain protocols and certain things are blocked on that Wi-Fi network, and that there's not allowing the use of the VPN. I've seen that I've actually in hotels that I'm trying to like connect to my work VPN, and I find out that I have to pay either the premium price to use a corporate VPN. I've run into those situations, or sometimes the super free Wi-Fi, like at fast food chains, they really limit it. They only want you using, basic internet.
Yeah. Interesting.
And the reason for that is interesting because if you're using a VPN, there's no way for, them to see what sites you're going to because that's all encrypted.
Mm-hmm.
And so if they have maybe a marketing program going on, they may want to see and if you read the terms of service, which is interesting, a lot of these free Wi-Fi, they actually say you are opting in to marketing programs and other things by using their free Wi-Fi. So something to think about.
So that means they are likely wanting to scan your traffic, right?
Well, they are recording it. Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, not necessarily the communication, right? So say if you're connecting to your Gmail, you're accessing your Gmail. I mean, that's HTTPS. It's all encrypted, right?
Yeah.
But they can access the request to Google, to your Gmail. So they see, your device, and your IP address and those things, which gets into things like fingerprinting, right? So they can have a record of, plus the cookie that it probably deposited in your web browser too. They know every time you come back to that McDonald's that, oh, hey, look, Scott's back. They may not know your name, but they definitely know how many times you've been to that McDonald's. I mean, this is all big data type analytics that they're collecting, right?
Yeah. Interesting. I just thought it would be a good to let people know
It's cool.
This kind of stuff happens and why it happens and what you can do about it.
Yeah.
So, cool. Well, thanks for that, Tom.
Sure.
All right. Well, I think that probably wraps up our episode for today. Should we provide our contact info?
Yeah. So if you want to reach out to us about the podcast or have any topics or questions or potential interviews, you can contact us at feedback@sharedsecurity.net.
Absolutely. And in addition to having people on our podcast, we're certainly happy to go on other podcasts too. If reciprocal, if you have a podcast or something you'd like us to chat on, contact us. And I think you said our feedback at sharedsecurity.net, and we are on Twitter.
We're on everything. Yeah,
we're on all the internet,
Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're on all the socials. That's right.
All right. Cool. Well, want to thank everybody for joining us, and we will not prolong it any further, but thanks again, and we will talk to you next time.
Thanks, everyone.